So this is for you? Okay. And, oh, Gia, buonasera. And we also need, abbiamo bisogno di...
Ma siamo solo io e te con microfono, loro hanno il...
Noi abbiamo sì il microfonino incorporato.
Okay. Allora.
Agnieszka, you have this, so you can speak without the microphone.
Oh, okay. Buonasera e benvenuti al Castello di Rivoli in quest'autunno freddo un po' che inizia finalmente ad arrivare con la sua bellezza e anche la sua difficoltà di accesso al museo. So che molti di voi hanno trovato traffico e quindi vi ringraziamo. Desidero presentare più che guidare questa sera. Siamo qui riuniti per celebrare due cose. Una è un nuovo numero della rivista FlashArt di novembre e quindi ho con me il piacere di avere Gea Politi e mi commuove perché conoscevo suo papà prima che Gea Politi esistesse e quindi e sua madre Elena Kontova, avendo iniziato la mia carriera come piccola minuscola critica d'arte che scriveva le recensioni per FlashArt da Roma, mi pare, all'epoca, poco dopo aver finito.
Dopo i tuoi studi.
E la seconda cosa che celebriamo questa sera è la mostra di Agnieszka Kurant, artista nata in Polonia, a Lodz, nel 78 credo, che vive ed è basata a New York. E il perché possiamo fare questa cosa è perché il numero di novembre di FlashArt, senza che abbiamo pagato un soldo, ha pubblicato 25 pagine sul FlashArt International sul lavoro di Agnieszka Kurant, con un'intervista, conversation con Noam Segal, che è online da qualche parte nel mondo, nell'etere. Quindi, that's what's going on. But first, I need to say a few words of thanks to all the people and all the parties that are the stakeholders of our museum and that hold stakes in it in the sense that they care for it. So our programs, i nostri programmi sono resi possibili primariamente grazie alla Regione Piemonte. La ragione del mio ritardo è che l'assessore della Regione Piemonte era in visita alla mostra anche di Agnieszka e quindi spero che perdonerete questi minuti di ritardo. Ma è anche importante per il nostro museo la città di Torino e anche la città di Rivoli, che è proprietaria dell'edificio che ospita il nostro museo. Anche molto importante per il nostro museo sono la Fondazione CRT, la Fondazione CRT per l'arte, che peraltro permette le acquisizioni e la crescita della nostra collezione grazie agli acquisti incomodato per noi. Anche importante la Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, che sostiene il nostro CRRI, cioè il nostro centro di ricerca, e anche partner del Museo Intesa San Paolo, e infine la Fondazione CRC di Cuneo sostiene le nostre attività nel territorio fuori dalle mura, che è il futuro anche, a mio parere, dei musei, il rapporto anche fuori dalle mura con il proprio territorio. I'm saying extremely intellectual things. Okay. In particolare la mostra di Agnieszka Kurant, Crowd Crystal, che vedrete al primo piano, cioè second floor del Castello di Rivoli, è stata curata oltre che da me anche da Marcella Beccaria, che ringrazio e che è credo in giro nel museo, è qui, ecco qua. E la mostra è realizzata grazie al contributo della Fondazione per l'Arte Moderna e Contemporanea CRT ed è parte di un progetto più vasto che si chiama Espressioni e che troverà la sua conclusione alla fine di gennaio con l'inaugurazione di una grande collettiva. ma è importante anche riconoscere il sostegno dei nostri amici benefattori del museo e un gruppo di collezionisti appassionati dell'arte. In particolare desidero ringraziare per il loro sostegno Andrea Ruben Levi e Patrizia Sandretto Rerebodengo, che sin dall'inizio si è dedicata a sostenere l'opera di Agnieszka Kurant. E infine si deve ringraziare l'Istituto Polacco, credo per un biglietto di aereo, una roba del genere, giusto? Yes. So, we thank them, the Polish Institute. Ecco, tutto fa, come si dice. Ok, da un altro punto di vista è una mostra molto interessante perché la ricerca per la mostra è una collaborazione. È stato realizzato grazie alla collaborazione e al contributo di numerosi scienziati ed enti di ricerca, tra cui The Transformations of the Human, progetto di Berggruen Institute, e Art and Technology Lab di Los Angeles County Museum. Ringrazio anche l'Università di Torino, il Dipartimento di Scienze della Vita e Biologia dei Sistemi e anche la restauratrice e conservatrice Luisa Menzi, con la quale con grande coraggio ha lavorato Agnieszka Kurant al fine di creare un nuovo tipo di opera che si chiama Adjacent Possible e che vedrete su e di cui forse si parlerà. Desidero ringraziare infine la curatrice Marianna Vecellio che Now We Need a Celebration Clap è recentemente diventata madre, per cui non ha collaborato alla cura, ma è rientrata al museo e quindi subito l'ho sequestrata in una conversation con l'artista. So I'm going to sit down and non mi è chiaro come proseguiamo. What should we do first? Celebrate the magazine and then get to the art?
Yes, that's possible. Also, welcome Noam Segal.
Ecco.
She's waiting for us.
I can't see her.
Hi Noam, can you see us?
Sì. Quindi siamo in un public program in cui alcune persone sono qui, altre sono lontano e non crea una impossibilità, ma crea una relazione tra distanza e prossimità che peraltro è alla radice del lavoro di Agnieszka. So, passerei la parola prima a Gea per parlare con una domanda: perché in questo numero, in questo momento, Agnieszka?
Giusto. I had my mic, sorry. We should do it in English, correct? Or...
You can do it in any language you want.
Okay.
You can do it in Chinese if you want. I will translate anything.
So wish I should, actually. You see, I'm limited in that way, unfortunately. I'm sorry. So it's going to be a simple English language and very simple, also beyond simple English. But I just wanted to say something about the first time I actually encountered Agnieszka's work before introducing the magazine and the issue. It was actually quite funny because I was studying in London at Goldsmiths. It was around 2008, and there was a frieze art fair. And in that frieze art fair, there was a cage with parrots. And probably you all know what I'm talking about, but to me, it was actually, my booth, the magazine area, was right next to that cage. So instead of feeling the traffic of the public, I was actually hearing parrots all day, and it was marvelous. It was something that was so liberating. Instead of like feeling in a fair, I was actually feeling, I was experiencing something else. Not even a zoo, but like an animal context or something definitely more natural. So I thank you for that, and thanks to that installation, I started, investigating on the work of Agnieszka. So why Agnieszka is in this issue? Actually, one of the leading texts that brought us to the title, Ultra Bodies, Ultra Species, was Agnieszka's text, thanks to a conversation with Noam. And the reason was that we already investigated before the pandemic the idea of coexistence, non-human agency, and this kind of topics 3 years ago, I guess. And we realized, obviously, that there was a step forward, a strong step forward, because now there was a very, the role of the digital side was really playing a huge difference. And so that was the reason why we decided to investigate again on the human and non-human, and obviously Agnieszka's work came into our mind immediately.
Is that the subject of the entire issue?
Exactly, yeah. So,
Quindi
so the two
riassunto.
leading, yeah, so the two...
Should I
exactly.
translate?
Oh, sorry.
Alzare le mani chi deve ricevere una traduzione dall'inglese. Ah,
Bravissimi.
fantastico. Okay.
This is a good generation. There's a great audience. So
the entire
the
issue.
entire issue is based on that, yes, on the idea of what are the ultra species, what can be, what are the ultra species and what are the ultra bodies, what is the ultra bodies today, and so the other leading text is Pamela Rosenkrantz, written by Nicolas Bourriot. So those are I would say, the ones that really taught us to understand what could have been the, yeah. And
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
So we are very lucky at Castello because it's a good coincidence and we didn't know about this coincidence. So it's very good. So we can learn a little bit more about your work through this issue, which we are launching today. But I don't think we are selling at our bookshop tonight, are we?
I think, yeah, you have a couple
so
of
you
copies.
can also buy the magazine, which is what one should say when one launches a book. And you can even get a signature by Politi, maybe, which is not a small thing. It's a wonderful thing. And maybe also by Agnieszka. So that said, I would like to ask
will send
Noam.
an electric
Yes.
signature.
I would like to
electronic
ask, the pronunciation is Noam, to explain, if she can, how Agnieszka Kurant was transformative for her. One is never the same after engaging with an artist, never. It changes us, we change. So in what way was this transformative, and can you summarize, since you are an art critic, the relevance of Agnieszka's work, and maybe even, which is very difficult, summarize what it is that she does?
Okay. So first, thank you, and I want to thank all of you, the ladies that you introduced me, and you're sitting there, and I'm not with you, so thank you for that. And thanks, Agnieszka, for the wonderful talk we had. How should I start? It's a very big question, but I guess it suits the event of a very big show. I think for me, Agnieszka's work excels in a number of things, which are a little bit abstract, but I'll try my best. The first one is the constellation of temporalities. And I think this is something that is very evident in the work that you had in Castello today, the adjacent possible. Agnieszka not only uses different temporalities, but she also presents a different attitude towards the contemporary. When I say the contemporary, I think automatically sometimes about Agamben's works, about what does it mean to be contemporaneity. And in that sense, Agnieszka take another zoom out, right? She has a more elevated bird's eye view from the event. And she goes for 42,000 years ago to track the science and then give them to the most cutting edge technologies to be learned by AI, by artificial intelligence machines, and then to go back to that point in history, allegedly. So it's basically not connecting two broken vertebrae, is actually connecting two different points in time, and with a gap that is happening in between them. And in that sense, the temporality she takes is not only not linear, it's even spatial in that sense, because it creates new mapping of temporalities and of time connections. That, I think, is really groundbreaking. And also when we think about the new branding of Facebook, I'm sure you've heard about the meta universe. It speaks to that in some very, very interesting ways. But I think more than that, besides the question of the temporality, Agnieszka also adds to the question of the function. So as I guess you know, the people in the audience or know a little bit, Agnieszka also works with different entities that would be collective intelligence, bacteria or fungi, minerals, it could be termites like in this image, or it could be jellyfish for that matter. And basically what she does with adjacent possible is to reappropriate the, let's say, the evolutional function of this bacteria to be colonized and pivoted and to kind of like to be reprogrammed to enhance the same uses it was doing between that point in time to now on. So it's basically the function that happens in between those very, very ancient signs that were done with some pigment and then were taken over by a natural fungi. Now Agnieszka learns the fungi how to reappropriate that function in a new constellation. So the fungi is no longer the fungi, it's a combination of corals and jellyfish and leeches as well that are being made just to expand that very ancient function of those pigments. So it's basically a change of temporalities, it changes of functionality and labor, it changes the notion of colonization, and it changes the movements over time and how she connects different points in time. That said, those issues also brings to mind question that has to do with authorship. Another thing that Agnieszka challenges very often is that the idea of individual authorship, basically claiming that there is no just such thing, and we can see it, I guess, with today's economy more and more, that if it's a new innovation or if it's a new, let's say, a platform, a digital platform, or even a spaceship, it's not a one person who made it, it's always a group of people, and Agnieszka works always enhances the invisible labor that has been put to expand ideas, to become gadgets and to become patents and things that really make our world the way it is. So I think the combination of all of these different functionalities, from temporalities to functions to applications over different fields, creating a really different kind of assemblage. And in that sense, maybe, Caroline, I will give it back to you. I think the word assemblage is the best I could come up with. But again, coming back to adjacent possible, I think in that sense, it also forms a new logic for the concept of the index. It shows a completely different indexicality that is missing from our day-to-day language, but it's also not in the very ancient past, but it's also, we don't know that it exists in the future as well. So this whole mashup is really a fascinating topic to start and mapping it out. I will give this
Thank
to
you. Thank you so much. Quindi Noam sottolinea in particolare l'aspetto di diverse temporalità che si toccano, cioè 40.000 anni fa, allorché si trovano tra le più anziane scritture umane sul pianeta, e oggi nel creare un nuovo, ricreare la funzione per i funghi o i batteri che essi avevano all'inizio nel consumare i pigmenti e quindi tutelare il più antico alfabeto umano attraverso questa funzione dell'organico che mangia il pigmento e poi nella sua procreazione nei millenni tramanda a noi l'alfabeto. I did not translate, I was just explaining how the work was made, Noam, so that they could understand what you said, your interpretation of it. So I would like to ask Marianna, since in this age of collective intelligence where individual subjects seem to not be relevant anymore, although I might be a dinosaur, I really think I'm an I, you know, even though I'm a we. As a feminist, we are all traversed by thousands of different DNAs, and as Donna Haraway has taught us and so forth. But even so, I actually talk about this a lot with Agnieszka, you know, that she's celebrating and talking about collective intelligence, but then she signs it with her name, and then she actually from a formal perspective in the result of the piece, puts a hell of a lot of her own very strong agency and intentionality. So that's something as an older woman in the art field that I would suggest to investigate, because one thing is what people say, one thing is what people do. Now she does and says both, so it's even more complicated. But anyway, that said, I'd like to ask Marianna, who was not an expert of Agnieszka Kurant at all, and but I sent her all the texts from the future MIT books. Yes. I think you must have studied. So you who have such an incredible sensibility for art, what does Agnieszka, why is Agnieszka's work relevant? And then we will have Agnieszka speak and then maybe go see the show. Yeah.
Well, among the different aspects that Agnieszka raised in her artwork, there are definitely a new form of subjectivity, which is something that strikes me strongly. And because you are a conceptual artist, but you are also like better a transdisciplinary artist, and your work examine and explore this new subjectivity in our techno-capitalist society. Basically, your contemporary human identity in your approach is no more based on a singular individual experience, but is more the result of a collective status of the living. You often say that the self is collapsed, but you also say that the self is a polyphony, an assembled state of matter, a polychronic state of matter, which is something that is also referring to.
She just said. Yeah,
yes, exactly, to what Noam correctly said. So is the result of an hybrid fusion of different states, non-human, manufactured, synthetic, post-human. So a polyphony in a constant state of reconfiguration. And in this regard, I was very struck about you quoting Catherine Malabou, the French philosopher, and her concept of plasticity.
Who was here a few months ago.
Really?
Of course, for digital PTSD. Yeah.
Well, Catherine Malabou wrote a beautiful book titled The Ontology of the Accident, in which she examining basically the plasticity of ourself. Malabou described properly the self as a matter that can be affected by experiences, of traumas, because she speaks properly about the traumas. So she defined this sort of ontology of becoming. And in this regard, I was interested in asking to Agnieszka if individuality is now an obsolete concept, or we can still find, because I know that you find us among collectiveness, among the crowd, this crystal crowd, which gives the title to the exhibition. So this potentiality of the crowd in creating knowledge and creating. So I was very struck by this concept of just change, concept of subjectivity.
So that's a question for Agnieszka.
Thank you, Marianna. It's a very important question, and it's actually, I think it definitely is at the core of my practice, a lot of projects that I develop, because indeed, for me, the concept, the notion of the self as an individual, as a singular unit, is definitely a concept that we have to part with. That is going to be. That has changed, because on the one hand, as I'm trying to discuss in this exhibition, what really counts for contemporary late capitalism are crowds, are obviously not individuals, but individuals in aggregate. So large crowds of people, and especially the digital footprints that we are all leaving online through our behaviors, and the ways in which they could be monetized. The ways in which they can be capitalized on. So on the one hand, the crowds are the new assets of capitalism, but on the other hand, the notion of an individual self is also collapsing because the research of, for example, immunology or virology or studies of microorganisms prove that our immune system is actually based on the agency of non-human entities. So bacteria inside of our stomachs are influencing our moods, how we make decisions, our mental states. Meanwhile, viruses that are present within our organisms are impacting the neurotransmitters in our brains. So when we think about it, all these non-human agencies that become part of self. But then what is self? If part of self is the non-self, is the other non-human entities, obviously the notion of the self as we understood it before collapses, because now we know that the decisions we make in our life are often dictated by microorganisms inside of us, for example. So this is a kind of point of departure, this two kinds of collective intelligence, one on the level of society, so as I was saying, crowds or various forms of mining, of exploitation of the collective labor, of the labor of the multitude, labor of an entire society, and on the other hand, collective intelligence on the level of an individual, which basically what it means is that there are no individuals. We could say that every single self is a collective intelligence of all these entities.
Yeah, I'm not actually moderating this. I was just introducing. So I'm going to sit in the audience and let you guys work this out. Okay.
Do you want people to go and see the show?
Yes, I would very much like people to go and see the show. So I would say just one last few words, and then we wrap it up and go see the show. Okay.
Well, maybe it would be nice to go back to the exhibition before people leave so that they can get some general information about what they will see. So I would maybe focus on one of the newest work that you have realized on the occasion of this exhibition that have already been introduced by Noam before, which is Adjacent Possible. In the exhibition as a title, Crowd Crystal. There are other previous work, Conversion, Phantom Island, Chemical Garden, and Post-Fordite, but this Adjacent Possible, it's a newly commissioned work, which is a huge enterprise, I would say, because it's really the result of a collaboration among different experts, laboratory, field of knowledge. Addition possible is start from the discovery of 32 sites, or maybe it's better if you would like to describe the works.
Of course.
Yes, please.
Well, it started when I discovered the research of the paleoanthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger, who a number of years ago documented thousands of signs in various caves around Europe. These are signs from often the same caves in which we know there exist beautiful realist depictions of animals that were usually attracting paleoanthropologists before. But what Genevieve von Petzinger discovered is that in the same caves and also in other caves, there are also geometric signs or kind of pictograms of sorts that date from the same period. So the oldest ones signs are 40,000 years old, is 40,000 years BC. Possibly some of them are even older, but there are currently no ways of dating them precisely. But these signs were very interesting because they were first attempts of expressing symbolic signs, first attempts at symbolic communication, creating symbols or perhaps some early forms of proto-writing, which is really mind-blowing when we think about the fact that writing as we know it was created in Babylon and 5,000 years BC, and this is what we know as fully formed beginnings of writing. But these signs resemble writing so much, are very complex, and they were not really documented from that perspective. This was the first time when groups of individuals kind of somehow must have agreed on a symbol, on a sign. It was also a way of transferring knowledge, transferring information beyond the individual, and also memorizing things or some kind of recording information. So very advanced from the civilization point of view. Technology of memorizing or sharing knowledge, but these signs were not really examined before, and so she cataloged all these signs and realized that they are repeating in various caves, and actually there are 32 signs, the iterations of which we find in different caves. So for me, it was really an absolutely amazing discovery. And I wanted to use very contemporary tools to analyze these signs. So I collaborated with two computational social scientists, Leron Schultz and Justin Lane, who one of them works in Norway, another in Bratislava, and they work on various projects around computational social science, and they helped me to use artificial intelligence algorithms to analyze these signs and to produce, using machine learning, new signs based on this huge data set of old signs, to produce other potential signs or forms of symbolic communication that could have emerged back then, or maybe even they emerged, but we don't have any traces of them because they didn't survive over the millennia. So basically this project is kind of collapsing as Noam pointed out, technologies of the present or maybe even of the future with ancient technologies, very analog technologies of early humans.
Thank you. Maybe, I don't know if people want to join the show that is opening right now. Maybe there's someone that wants to make a question from the public, or we want to just close the conversation.
Can I ask one question?
Oh, yes, please, of course.
If nobody wants to ask, actually. And I don't want to steal time from people, but I wanted to ask you, Agnieszka, is there, when you enter the rooms in Castello di Rivoli, is there a sort of like pathway that we are following when, we're going through your exhibition?
Yes, but I think that the pathway is more like a mental pathway of different layers, because, many of my works are related to somehow experimenting on or analyzing or exploring the molecular level of matter, and a lot of these works, they are changing over time, and especially like the conversions paintings. So you can come back to the same room 5 minutes later and these paintings will look completely different. So for that reason, it's kind of like a circular movement. But all these, what we didn't mention tonight yet is that most of these works are related to questions of footprints and traces that we all make in geology, from ancient traces and signs made by humans to footprints made, carbon footprints of the industrial and post-industrial economy, to digital footprints that we now all make. And all these forms, they are changing over time. And so, the idea is to kind of circulate and go back even come back to the exhibition and see chemical garden as it's decaying over time. So I would say that there is no clear pathway. The ideas of more kind of going deep inside of the molecular level of matter and this kind of travel inside of your head. You know, you have different, basically the exhibition consists of all these forms of organization of matter, forms that are in different states of growth or evolution or decomposition, dissolution, and I wanted to evoke precisely this kind of movement and constant perpetual change of things that are crystallizing or that are evolving, morphing, mutating. So for that reason, I would say that the path is kind of impossible.
I don't know if Noam want to add some more comments on this.
Maybe just to say that the idea of growth in Agnieszka's work is another fascinating concept that is yet unfamiliar. In the sense that Agnieszka pulls strings from growth, from financial growth and capitalist growth, but also from the idea of environmental colonialization and environmental destruction. And the way she combines them basically to a point of ad absurdum. So we'll see how much basically data mining and surveillance capitalism is under our skin. And I think in that sense, it's a very interesting way to look at the different trajectories and the different growth movements that are in tandem in one exhibition and see how expandatory and futuristic they are.
So before going to the exhibition, I ask you a last question. We go back to the exhibition Crowd Crystal, a title that is inspired by Elias Canetti, the book Mass and Power, published in 1960. So because we often hear about the expression, the crowd, and somehow often is not so a positive terms. And the notion of crowd bring to my mind In the Swarm, the book written by the Korean German philosopher Byung-Chul Han. He wrote this very striking book in which he denounced the cries of subjectivity, elaborating a very dramatic vision in regard to this. So, according to the philosopher, the digital society coincide with the end of an intersubjective dimension. So everybody get lost in the crowd. So you highlight the criticalities of the digital society, such as the exploitation, invisible labor, the state of surveillance. But at the end, I find a certain optimism in your approach and in your work. So it looks like that you believe in the potentiality of creativity, which is in the, let's say, also in the cognitive capitalism worker today. So.
Yes, I mean, I strongly believe that the healing, the rebuilding of both the commons and the collective subjectivity, the collective unconscious, are the most important goals for societies today. You know, for example, the idea of creating the image of the future, some kind of dreaming about the future, because we're living in times when most people don't really imagine future as anything positive. Most people see the future only as a threat. It's going to be a cataclysm, an extinction, end of climate change, end of civilization, or we're going to all be replaced by artificial intelligence and robots. The myth, the utopian myth of thinking about the future as something positive, something that will bring positive change, is largely over. And but that is related to, I mean, to many factors, obviously, what is happening in the world. But as Bifo Berardi, who is a very important philosopher for me, as he very often points out, it's also important for us to create the narratives, to build, to imagine, to relearn to dream about the future, because only if we imagine something possible, the adjacent possible, you know, of an alternative scenarios, of only then something like this is even possible to happen. Because if we already are excluding it and only thinking that we're just basically executing this negative program, the chances of any change are zero. But you know, a lot of the works in this exhibition are also talking about this, like, yes, particular temporalities and the future, and how the future also became object of speculation. So it's, for me, you know, because of the quantification of the crowds, because of the aggregation of information about people, everything is seems to be computable and quantifiable, especially our emotions, our mental states, which is really dangerous. But the reason why I got interested in collective intelligence is one of the reasons is the fact that when you look at a crowd, and the phenomena that can happen in society, these phenomena are so complex that thankfully, I still think that this is thankfully, and this is kind of humbling, these phenomena are so complex that they are actually impossible to anticipate and to compute. For example, it's still not exactly possible to anticipate the result of elections, even though there are many specialists doing it, but still we get surprised by phenomena like Brexit and Trumpism because many people behave very irrationally in their decisions and their political decisions. And the same way, it's still impossible to compute, to anticipate revolutions and social movements and how they will evolve. Who would have known that Occupy Wall Street, for example, that seemed so powerful and full of energy, that ultimately it's not going to transform America the way that we imagined, and it's not going to form new forms of government, new forms of you know, political parties, for example. It's impossible to anticipate this. On the other hand, you know, there were a lot of phenomena that happened because of digital crowds, because of the digital mobilization of crowds, such as the Arab Spring. And all these phenomena, and of course the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests that happened during the pandemic, these phenomena are so complex that they are actually uncomputable, at least for the moment. And this leaves me with a certain optimism, because not everything is computable, and because people, you know, people are self-organizing, and the pandemic also created this possibility of a reconfiguration, of change, of many people being aware of the fact that humanity is brittle, is fragile, and it has an expiry date, and you know, so yes, I mean, I'm not exactly an optimist. I'm just looking for reasons not to completely despair.
Okay, that's good.
Marianna, if I can, I want to maybe add to what Agnieszka said, because it's so central to her practice. The way that Agnieszka oftentimes shapes up a third way that is non-binary. So it's not necessarily good or evil, black and white, but the way she, even with this image of chemical gardens, that by now we know that the brine pools and like slime pools that are in the bottom of the ocean are highly toxic to their immediate environment, but also they form new forms of life. And in that sense, I just want to offer that in every one in Agnieszka's works, which makes it so fascinating, the vision of it is not as binary. It's not going to go this way or the other, but basically scrap this understanding that there's going to be a horrible future or a very optimistic future, but something completely different. New modulations of the human, or it's no longer the human, but the multi-species one. So in that sense, I think it's also very, very feminist.
That's an interesting aspect to see your work. Do you define yourself a feminist through your artworks?
I think that I'm really interested in like embracing all the also non-existent and not yet defined forms of subjectivity, of sexuality, and I think that I'm very careful with different kind of labels and categories. And I mean, in principle, yes, I'm of course a feminist, but also like I think that at least the past few years created so many other areas that we have to be aware of and respect.
Yes.
And I almost feel that the word feminist is no longer encompassing so many agencies, and it's already limiting and already becoming questioned. So whatever is the quantification of feminism, you know, the feminism squared or quadrupled, that's probably how I could define myself, including all the not only current but also future forms of subjectivity, sexuality, identity. I think that's where I am.
So we are ending with the title of the magazine, Ultra Species, Ultra Bodies.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Agnieszka. I think that we have to close the conversation, otherwise the people will not have the time to visit the exhibition. Thanks so much, Agnieszka. Thanks, Politi, for coming, and Noam Segal for being connected with us, and to the audience that was here till now.
Thank you so much.